Key findings from the CRTF Executive Report, Part 1. In order to maintain slavery, colonial and American governments adopted white supremacist beliefs and passed laws to uphold a system that stole the labor and intellect of people of African descent. This system was maintained by, and financially benefited, the entire United States of America and its territories. This system of white supremacy is, a badge of slavery, and continues to be embedded today in numerous American and Californian legal and social systems. Throughout American history, this system has been upheld by federal, state, and local laws and policies, as well as by violence and terror. All over the country, but particularly in the South during the era of legal segregation, federal, state, and local governments directly engaged in, supported, or failed to protect African Americans from violence and terror aimed at subjugating them. These government actions and derelictions of duty caused compounding physical and psychological injury for generations. In California, racial violence against African Americans began during slavery, continued through the 1920s, as groups like the Ku Klux Klan permeated local governments and police departments, and peaked after World War II as African Americans attempted to move into white neighborhoods. After the Civil War, African Americans briefly won political power during Reconstruction. In response, Southern states responded by systematically stripping African Americans of their power to vote. Racist lawmakers elected from Southern states blocked hundreds of federal civil rights laws and edited important legislation to exclude or discriminate against African Americans, harming African American Californians. Government actors, working with private individuals, actively segregated America into African American and white neighborhoods. In California, federal, state, and local governments created segregation where none had previously existed through discriminatory federal housing policies, zoning ordinances, school siting decisions, and discriminatory federal mortgage policies known as redlining. Funded by the federal government, the California state and local government also destroyed African American homes and communities through park and highway construction, urban renewal, and by other means. Enslavers denied education to enslaved people in order to control them. Throughout American history, African American students across the country and in California have attended schools with less funding and resources than white students. After slavery, Southern states passed laws to prevent African American and white students from attending the same schools. Throughout the country, children went to the school in their neighborhoods, so education segregation was created by residential segregation. Many public schools in the United States never integrated in the first place, or were integrated and then resegregated. Today, California is the 6th most segregated state in the country for African American students who attend schools with less funding and resources than white students. Due to residential segregation, African Americans, compared to white Americans, are more likely to live in worse quality housing and in polluted neighborhoods with inadequate infrastructure. African American Californians face similar harms. Government-issued financial assistance has historically excluded African Americans from receiving benefits. The current child welfare systems in the country and in California operate on harmful and false racial stereotypes of African Americans. This has resulted in extremely high rates of African American children removed from their families, even though African American parents generally do not mistreat their children at higher rates than white parents. Federal and state governments, including California, failed to protect African American artists, culture makers, and media makers from discrimination, and simultaneously promoted discriminatory narratives. State governments memorialized the Confederacy as just and heroic through monument building, while suppressing the nation's history of racism and slavery. Federal, state, and local government actions, including in California, have directly segregated and discriminated against African Americans at work. Federal and state policies like affirmative action produced mixed results and were short-lived. African Americans continue to face employment discrimination today in the country and in California. American government at all levels, including in California, have historically criminalized African Americans for the purposes of social control and to maintain an economy based on exploited African American labor. This criminalization is an enduring badge of slavery and has contributed to the over-policing of African American neighborhoods, the school-to-prison pipeline, the mass incarceration of African Americans, a refusal to accept African Americans as victims, and other inequities in nearly every corner of the American and California legal systems. As a result, the American and California criminal justice system physically harms, imprisons, and kills African Americans more than other racial groups relative to their percentage of the population. The government actions described in this report have had a devastating effect on the health of African Americans in the country and in California. Compared to white Americans, African Americans live shorter lives and are more likely to suffer and die from almost all diseases and medical conditions than white Americans. Researchers have linked these health outcomes in part to African Americans' unrelenting experience of racism. In addition to physical harm, African Americans experience psychological harm, which can profoundly undermine African American children's emotional and physical well-being and their academic success. Government laws and policies perpetuating badges of slavery have helped white Americans accumulate wealth, while erecting barriers which prevented African Americans from doing the same. These harms compounded over generations, resulting in an enormous gap in wealth today between white Americans and African Americans in the nation and in California.